My parents prioritized my golden brother's ceremony over visiting me at my serious condition. I-32F was in a terrible car accident about 2 weeks ago. I was driving home from work when another car hit me from the side. The impact was so severe that my car flipped over. The paramedics later told me I was lucky to be alive. I ended up with a fractured leg, 2 broken ribs, and internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. I was in the hospital for a week recovering from the surgery and trying to process everything. Obviously, being in the hospital was rough both physically and emotionally. From the moment I woke up, all I wanted was for my parents to visit me. I figured they'd come rushing over as soon as they heard I was in an accident. I wasn't expecting them to stay the whole time or anything, but even just a visit would have meant the world to me. Instead, they didn't show up for days. I lay there waiting, hoping maybe they'd come by, or at least call, but nothing. I think I was in the hospital for 4 days before I even got a text from them. And before anyone asks if my parents were informed about what had happened to me, yes, they were informed. They are my emergency contacts, and the hospital told me that they had reached out to them multiple times. The hospital finally managed to get through to my parents a day after I was admitted, but according to the nurses, my parents seemed nonchalant about everything. Of course, that hurt me deeply, but I tried to rationalize that maybe they were too busy or something had come up. Luckily, my belongings survived the crash, so I still had my phone with me. I texted my parents every day, about 5 to 6 hours apart, but still received no word from them. Each day was pretty much a nightmare, and I just wanted to see familiar faces. I did my best to give my parents a lot of leeway for not visiting me, but it only got harder with every hour that passed where they didn't even bother to check on me. Thankfully, my friends who live in different states managed to reach out to a few family members who live nearby, so I wasn't completely alone. I think it was on the 6th day in the hospital when a family friend visited me and casually mentioned how great it was that my brother was being recognized at an awards ceremony for his work. I had no idea what she was talking about. She seemed confused that I didn't know but filled me in on what was happening. Turns out my parents were attending my brother's awards ceremony instead of coming to see me. They knew I was in the hospital, but they chose to be there for my brother's special moment instead of supporting me during a really rough time. They had waited so long to even contact me because they were too busy getting ready for my brother's big event. They cared more about how they looked at his ceremony than their injured daughter. Wow. And before anyone comes at me for being jealous of my brother, it's not that I don't understand why they'd be proud of him. I know he's talented and that he's worked hard for everything he's gotten. The thing is, he's always been the golden child ever since we were kids. Everything he did was praised to the skies while I was mostly ignored. He's super successful now, working for some big company, and this award was a huge deal for him. But I was literally recovering from surgery. The least they could have done was visit me or even call me to see how I was doing. I wasn't asking for much, I just wanted my parents to show some concern for me. I could have lost my life that day, and they barely batted an eyelid. I felt humiliated and angry. I tried to reason away my parents' behavior, but I couldn't. So I decided to reach out to my parents and tell them how hurt I was. I sent them a text that essentially said I couldn't believe they chose my brother's award over my health. I told them how much it hurt that they didn't even check in on me. For the first time since my accident, I didn't have to wait long to get a response from them, and honestly, I wish they never replied because everything they said only hurt me more. They initially tried to justify their actions by saying things like how my brother's award was a once-in-a-lifetime achievement, and they couldn't miss it. Of course, I told them that they wouldn't have missed my brother's ceremony at all if they had just dropped by a few days ago. Eventually, they got tired of reasoning with me and told me that it didn't make sense for them to waste time visiting me when my brother was out there making the family proud. I can't even explain how much that stung. It was like I was nothing more than an afterthought to them. I wish I could say that I was surprised by their actions, but growing up, this is exactly how it's always been. My brother could do no wrong. Everything he did was celebrated. He got perfect grades, a scholarship, a fancy job. Every milestone was treated like a huge deal. Meanwhile, I was always in the background. Even when I did well, it wasn't good enough. I never got the same support, and every mistake I made was treated like a catastrophe. It's like they decided I was a failure early on, and nothing I did could ever change their minds. Fast forward a week after my brother's award ceremony, and suddenly my parents show up at the hospital. At first, I was confused because I had stopped trying to reach out to them after our last conversation. I mean, I knew my parents well enough to know that they didn't come to visit me because they cared for me. They came with flowers in their hands and fake smiles on their faces. They tried to make small talk with me about how I was holding up, but it was very clear that their minds were on something else. I knew that whatever they were thinking about was going to annoy me, so I told them to just tell me what was on their mind. I mean, it was insulting enough that my parents cared so little about whether I was alive or not. I didn't need their fake sympathy and concern. I didn't even need to convince my parents anymore to tell me what was on their mind because my mom broke down into tears pretty quickly. She then told me that my brother had been arrested for fraud at his company. Turns out the company my brother worked for had uncovered a massive fraud scheme, and my brother was right in the middle of it. He had been manipulating the company's accounts to funnel money into his personal investments. He got caught when one of his co-workers tipped off the higher-ups, and after an internal investigation, they handed everything over to the police. Now he's looking at some serious charges including embezzlement, forgery, and wire fraud. Apparently, my parents had already drained a lot of their savings trying to hire lawyers for him. They didn't have enough left to cover his bail, and that's why they came to me. They knew I had some savings from my job as a project manager at an IT company, and they wanted me to use it to bail him out. They also asked if I knew anyone who could pull some strings or help in any way. It was like I wasn't even their daughter, they just saw me as a resource to fix my brother's mess. I was still in pain, both physically and emotionally. I couldn't believe that after everything, they had the audacity to come to me for help. It felt like a slap in the face. They didn't care when I was lying in a hospital bed after surgery, scared and alone, but now that their favorite child was in trouble, they suddenly needed me. A part of me felt guilty. Maybe I should have helped for the sake of family, but the other part of me was furious. Why should I bail out the same brother who has always been handed everything on a silver platter? He's never had to face any consequences because my parents have always shielded him, and now they expected me to do the same. I told them I wasn't going to help. I said I didn't have the money, and even if I did, I didn't think it was my responsibility to bail him out. I reminded them that they hadn't even visited me until now and that they'd made it clear who they cared about more. They kept saying that family is supposed to stick together and that I was being selfish. They told me I'd regret it if I didn't help my brother, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Honestly, I've spent my whole life being pushed aside for my brother. No matter how hard I tried, I was never enough for them, and now that they needed something from me, they expected me to just forget all the times they left me out, ignored me, and made me feel like I didn't matter. It was the first time in my life that I felt like I had control over the situation, and I wasn't going to give that up. So now I'm lying here in my hospital bed, feeling both angry and a little guilty. My parents haven't spoken to me since I said no, and I know they're furious, but I just can't bring myself to care anymore. I've spent too long trying to earn their approval, and I'm done. Ida for refusing to bail out my brother and standing up to my parents after everything they've put me through. I feel like I might be the bad guy because they keep saying family should stick together no matter what, but I just can't get over how they've treated me my entire life, and especially now. I'm not sure what to do, but I feel like I've had enough. Update 1. Hey, everyone, I wanted to thank you for the support on my original post. It really gave me the strength to stand my ground. I didn't expect to update so soon, but a lot has happened since then. A few days after my parents showed up at the hospital, I was finally discharged. I can walk, but I need crutches because of the leg fracture, and breathing is still tough with my ribs healing. I was looking forward to going home, getting some peace, and being away from all the drama. That dream went out the window the second I pulled up to my apartment. My parents were waiting for me right outside my door, and the moment I saw them, I knew it wasn't going to be good. I hadn't told them exactly when I was being discharged, so they must have called the hospital to find out. They didn't waste any time. Before I could even get my keys out, they started bombarding me. They were furious and told me that I had crossed the line by refusing to help my brother. I don't think I've ever seen them this angry. It was like they were more upset at me saying no than they were about my brother committing fraud. They went on and on about how family should always come first, no matter what. They accused me of being spiteful and petty. They also said that I was holding a grudge against my brother and was using this situation as a way to get back at them. It didn't matter to them that I had almost died a week ago and was still recovering. They just saw me as an obstacle in the way of saving their precious son. They actually had the nerve to tell me that they expected me to step up now. According to them, this was my chance to prove that I wasn't a disappointment and that I could be a part of the family by doing the right thing. It was all so insane. They basically admitted that I wasn't a part of the family and that the only way I could redeem myself was by bailing out my brother. I flat out told them that I wasn't going to do it, and that's when things really blew up. My mom started sobbing right there at my doorstep and said things like, "You're punishing us for loving him more, and we've already lost one child, and now we're going to lose two." My dad, on the other hand, wasn't trying to guilt me, he only got angrier. He kept saying that I was selfish and heartless, that I didn't care about the family, and that I'd regret it when they were gone. Honestly, it took everything in me not to lose it. I was exhausted from the hospital stay. I could barely stand on my crutches, and now I was being told I was a terrible person for refusing to cover up my brother's mess. Not only that, but my parents also kept rubbing in my face the fact that they loved my brother more than me and that they purposely treated him better because of that. But I did not back down. I told them I wasn't going to spend a single penny on his bail or legal fees, and that if they didn't leave, I'd call the cops. That finally made them back off, but not without them throwing a few more insults my way. A couple of days after that doorstep ambush, my brother's case made the news. Apparently, the fraud was way bigger than we thought. The police found evidence that he had been funneling company money for over a year, and some of it had been laundered through fake business accounts in his name. They also discovered that he had helped a few of his co-workers hide their own stolen money, which means the whole thing is part of a larger investigation now. My brother isn't just facing fraud charges anymore, he's also being charged with money laundering and conspiracy. If he's found guilty, he could be looking at quite a few years in prison. The aftermath of that has been brutal. My parents are in full panic mode. They've spent years bragging about my brother's success to everyone they know, and now his reputation is completely ruined. They've been trying to manage the situation by telling everyone it's just a misunderstanding, and that it will all blow over, but people aren't buying it. My dad even lost a big client because word got around that his son was involved in a major fraud case. They're scrambling, and it's clear they have no idea what to do. And of course, they came crawling back to me again. This time they didn't even try to hide their desperation. They said they were under a lot of stress, and needed my help adjust this once to get through this. They kept saying that if I bailed my brother out, it would give them a chance to fix things and keep the family together. But I know exactly what that means. Fixing things means covering up his crimes, and keeping the family together means keeping up the illusion that their perfect son did nothing wrong. I told them no again, and now they've gone radio silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. Honestly, I think they've given up on me. They probably think I'm some sort of lost cause now and that I'm someone who turned their back on the family when they needed me the most. But you know what? I don't care anymore. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm in control. It hurts to know that my parents only see me as a backup plan and someone they can manipulate when things go wrong. But it also feels good to finally say no and to finally put myself first for once. I'm not going to bail out my brother just to please them, and I'm not going to let them guilt me into fixing a situation they created. They made their choices, and now they have to live with the consequences. Update 2. A lot of you have been asking for updates about my situation, and honestly, things have gotten even more complicated. I received an email from my brother. He convinced one of his friends who still believes he's innocent to reach out to me on his behalf since he doesn't have phone access in jail. At first, I was tempted to just delete it without reading it. I figured it would be another attempt to guilt me into helping him, but curiosity got the best of me, so I opened it. In the email, my brother claimed he was being framed. He admitted that yes, he was involved in the fraud at his company, but he swore he wasn't the mastermind. According to him, the higher-ups used him as a scapegoat to cover up their own crimes. He even said that some big executives were still out there walking free while he was stuck taking the fall. He begged me to help him, not for our parents, but because he said I was the only one who could save the family from completely falling apart. I don't know why, but that line really got under my skin. Maybe it was because for once, my brother actually acknowledged how toxic our parents have been. He admitted that they've always treated me unfairly and used him as a tool to boost their own egos. It was weird seeing him admit that because he's always gone along with it before. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was just saying whatever he thought would get me to help him. He even used saving the family as a reason for me to bail him out, which is something my parents have been saying since this whole mess started. Even though I told myself I was done with this whole mess, I couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to what he was saying. What if he really was being framed? What if this was all bigger than I thought? I guess part of me just wanted to know for sure. So I decided to do some digging. I reached out to a lawyer friend of mine, someone I trusted, and explained the situation. They couldn't give me a full legal breakdown since they weren't involved in the case, but they did give me some advice on how to get more information. With a little more digging, I found out that my brother's story wasn't completely false. He was involved in fraud. There was no denying that, but from what I could gather, it seemed like he wasn't the one pulling all the strings. Apparently, the fraud scheme went way deeper than just him. Some higher-level executives had been moving company funds for years, and they used my brother as a pawn. He was in charge of managing certain accounts, so when things blew up, all the blame fell on him. These higher-ups had strategically distanced themselves from the dirty work, and my brother was left holding the bag. Learning all of this made me confused about how I felt. On the one hand, I was angry that he was part of something so shady in the first place. Whether he was the mastermind or just a pawn, he still played a role in a major crime. It wasn't like he was some innocent bystander who got caught up in something without knowing he knew what he was doing, and he went along with it. He probably thought he would never get caught, but at the same time, I did feel a little sorry for him. It sucks knowing that he got used by people who were more powerful or more experienced at covering their tracks. It's clear those executives knew exactly what they were doing, and they made sure my brother would be the one to take the fall if things went south. I also couldn't help but think about how different things could have been if he hadn't grown up in a family that taught him it was okay to cut corners as long as you look successful on the outside. Our parents' constant praise and protection probably made him think he was untouchable. When I told my parents what I found out, they were surprisingly quiet. I think part of them knew deep down that my brother wasn't some innocent victim, but they just didn't want to admit it. Instead of acknowledging the truth, they kept pushing the same narrative that I was heartless for not helping him and that I was selfish for not putting the family first. Talking to them was like talking to a brick wall. At this point, I've decided that I'm not going to engage with them anymore. I've made my decision, and I'm standing by it. My brother can blame the executives all he wants, but he still made his bed, and now he has to lie in it. As for my parents, if they want to keep enabling him, that's their problem. I'm not going to ruin myself trying to save someone who wouldn't lift a finger for me if the roles were reversed. Honestly, I feel more at peace now than I have in a long time. I know I made the right choice, even if my family will never see it that way. I've spent too many years being treated like I didn't matter, and I'm done living like that. My brother's situation is tragic, but it's not my tragedy to fix. Thanks again to everyone who's been supporting me through this. It hasn't been easy, but knowing that I'm not alone in feeling this way has really helped. Update 3. Hey, it's been over a month since I last posted, and I finally have enough information to give you guys an update. Let me start with what my parents did after realizing that begging and insulting me wasn't going to work. They decided to try something else to make me more miserable than I was already feeling. They reached out to a bunch of my aunts, uncles, and cousins to tell them about how selfish and heartless I was for not bailing my brother out. They made it sound like I was just sitting on a mountain of money and refusing to help out of spite. They essentially told everyone that I was a monster and couldn't be trusted. I only found out about it because one of my cousins reached out to me and told me that my parents were going around saying some nasty things about me. They completely twisted the story to make it look like I was just holding a grudge, and conveniently left out how they abandoned me in the hospital and how they have not once since then checked up on how I was doing. All they ever called me for was to help my brother. At first, I was hurt. It felt like I was being punished all over again, even after standing up for myself. I thought I'd end up alone with no one on my side. But something unexpected happened. Instead of siding with my parents, a bunch of distant relatives started reaching out to me. Turns out my parents have burnt bridges with a lot of people over the years, all because of how they treated others and how they always prioritized my brother. I had no idea how deep this went. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years started sharing stories, and honestly, each one was more shocking than the last. One aunt told me about a time my brother borrowed a large sum of money from her husband to invest in some business idea. Of course, the idea flopped, and when my aunt tried to get her money back, my parents cut off contact with them completely. They even spread rumors about my aunt being greedy and unsupportive of family. Another cousin told me that my brother had crashed my uncle's car at a family event a few years ago and blamed it on a parking lot attendant. My parents backed him up and made sure the story didn't spread to avoid embarrassing the family. When my uncle tried to confront them about it, they accused him of trying to ruin my brother's reputation. There were so many stories like this, instances where my brother had done something wrong, and my parents had either covered it up or cut off anyone who dared to speak up about it. One relative even told me about how my parents had sabotaged a business partnership between my brother and another family member because they thought the relative wasn't prestigious enough to be associated with their son. Hearing all of this was both shocking and validating. I wasn't crazy. My parents really did have a long history of covering up for him and pushing people aside. For so long, I thought the way my parents treated me was somehow my fault, that maybe I wasn't good enough or didn't meet their expectations. But now I see that it was never about me. It was always about them protecting my brother, no matter the cost. They even shunned other family members who got in their way or questioned them. For those of you asking why exactly my parents have been so desperate for my help, it's because I've built a pretty solid life for myself despite their lack of support. As a project manager in a well-known IT company, I've made quite a lot of great connections over the years. I've been smart with my money too. I've built up savings and invested wisely. That's why my parents were so desperate for me to help. They knew I had the resources. But what they didn't seem to understand is that just because I could help doesn't mean I want to, especially not for people who have treated me like an afterthought my whole life. As for my brother's case, there's been a bit of an update. After I refused to bail him out, my parents eventually scraped together enough money from loans and favors to get him out of jail, but the investigation was far from over. A few weeks ago, my brother decided to cooperate with the authorities. From what I've learned, he gave up information on the higher-ups involved in the fraud, which helped the case move forward. Because he cooperated, he managed to get a reduced sentence. Instead of facing years behind bars, he'll be serving just a year and then doing community service. Honestly, I don't feel any relief about that. Sure, it's good that he cooperated, but that doesn't erase the fact that he still chose to be part of the scheme in the first place. And knowing my brother, I doubt this experience will change him much. He's always had my parents to clean up his messes, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. As for me, I've made a decision that I probably should have made a long time ago. I'm cutting off my parents for good. I've blocked them on everything. I even told my building's front desk not to let them in if they show up unannounced again. I'm done being their backup plan, their scapegoat, or their emotional punching bag. Surprisingly, I don't feel sad about it. I thought walking away from my family would feel like a huge loss, but it's the opposite. It feels like freedom. I finally get to live my life without constantly being compared to my brother or having to beg for scraps of affection from people who were never going to give it. The relatives who reached out from people who were never going to give it. The relatives who reached out have been amazing. They've made it clear that I'm not alone, and for the first time in a long time, I feel supported. It's funny. My parents spent so many years isolating me, but now I found a family where I least expected it. Many of these relatives have invited me to family gatherings that my parents won't be attending, and I'm actually looking forward to getting to know them better. One of my aunts even apologized for not seeing what was happening sooner. She said she always felt something was off about how my parents treated me, but she never spoke up because she didn't want to cause drama. Now she and several other family members have become my strongest supporters. I'm not sure what the future holds, but for the first time, I feel hopeful. Thank you all for your support and advice throughout this journey. It hasn't been easy, but reading your comments made me realize I wasn't crazy for standing up for myself. I finally feel like I'm in control of my life, and it feels insanely good.